The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Volume 1, Cosmogenesis. Part 2, The Evolution of Symbolism in its Approximate Order, with explanatory sections. Section 3, Primordial Substance and Divine Thought. Quote, as it would seem irrational to affirm that we already know all existing causes, permission must be given to assume, if need be, an entirely new agent. And quote, assuming what is not strictly accurate as yet, that the undulatory hypothesis accounts for all the facts, we are called on to decide whether the existence of an undulating ether is thereby proved. We cannot positively affirm that no other supposition will explain the facts. Newton's corpuscular hypothesis is admitted to have broken down on interference, and there is, at the present day, no rival. Still, it is extremely desirable in all such hypotheses to find some collateral confirmation, some evidence aliundi of the supposed ether. Some hypotheses consist of assumptions as to the minute structure and operations of bodies. From the nature of the case, these assumptions can never be proved by direct means. Their only merit is their suitability to express the phenomena. They are representative fictions. From Logic by Alexander Bain, LLD, Part 2, page 133. Ether, this hypothetical proteus, one of the representative fictions of modern science which nevertheless was so long accepted, is one of the lower, quote, principles, unquote, of what we call primordial substance, akasha in Sanskrit, one of the dreams of old, and which has now become again the dream of modern science. It is the greatest, just as it is the boldest of the surviving speculations of ancient philosophers. For the occultists, however, both ether and the primordial substance are a reality. To put it plainly, ether is the astral light, and the primordial substance is akasha, the upadhi of divine thought. In modern language, the latter would be better named cosmic ideation, spirit, the former cosmic substance, matter. These, the alpha and the omega of being, are but the two facets of the one absolute existence. The latter was never addressed or even mentioned by any name in antiquity except allegorically. In the oldest Aryan race, the Hindu, the worship of the intellectual classes never consisted, as with the Greeks, in a fervent adoration of marvelous form and art, which led later on to anthropomorphism. But while the Greek philosopher adored form, and the Hindu sage alone, quote, perceived the true relation of earthly beauty and eternal truth, unquote, the uneducated of every nation understood neither at any time. They do not understand it even now. The evolution of the God idea proceeds apace with man's own intellectual evolution. So true it is that the noblest idea to which the religious spirit of no one age can soar will appear but a gross caricature to the philosophic mind in a succeeding epoch. The philosophers themselves had to be initiated into perceptive mysteries before they could grasp the correct idea of the ancients in relation to the most metaphysical subject. Otherwise, outside such initiation, for every thinker there will be a thus far shalt thou go and no farther, mapped out by his intellectual capacity, as clearly, as unmistakably as there is for the progress of any nation or race in its cycle by the law of karma. Outside of initiation, the ideals of contemporary religious thought must always have their wings clipped and remain unable to soar higher, for idealistic as well as realistic thinkers, and even free thinkers, are but the outcome and the natural product of their respective environments and periods. The ideals of both are only the necessary results of their temperaments, and the outcome of that phase of intellectual progress to which a nation in its collectivity has attained. Hence, as already remarked, the highest flights of modern Western metaphysics have fallen far short of the truth. Much of current agnostic speculation on the existence of the first cause is little better than veiled materialism, the terminology alone being different. Even so, a great thinker as Mr. Herbert Spencer speaks of the unknowable occasionally in terms that demonstrate the lethal influence of materialistic thought, which, like the deadly Scirocco, has withered and blighted all current ontological speculation. Note, for instance, when he terms the first cause, the unknowable, a power manifesting through phenomena, and an infinite eternal energy, in brackets question mark. It is clear that he has grasped solely the physical aspect of the mystery of being, the energies of cosmic substance only. The co-eternal aspect of the one reality, cosmic ideation, as to its noumenon, it seems non-existent in the mind of the great thinker, is absolutely omitted from consideration. Without doubt, this one-sided mode of dealing with the problem is due largely to the pernicious Western practice of subordinating consciousness, or regarding it as a byproduct of molecular motion. End of note. From the early ages of the fourth race, when spirit alone was worshipped and the mystery was made manifest, down to the last palmy days of the Grecian art, at the dawn of Christianity, the Hellenes alone had dared to raise publicly an altar to the unknown God. Whatever St. Paul may have had in his profound mind when declaring to the Athenians that this, quote, unknown, unquote, ignorantly worshipped by them, was the true God announced by himself, that deity was not Jehovah, see the Holy of Holies, nor was he the maker of the world and all things, for it is not the God of Israel, but the unknown of the ancient and modern pantheist that dwelleth not in temples made with hands. From Acts 18, verse 23 to 24. Divine thought cannot be defined or its meaning explained except by the numberless manifestations of cosmic substance in which the form is sensed spiritually by those who can do so. To say this, after having defined it as the unknown deity, abstract, impersonal, sexless, which must be placed at the root of every cosmogony and its subsequent evolution, is equivalent to saying nothing at all. It is like attempting a transcendental equation of conditions for the true values of a set, having in hand for deducing them only a number of unknown quantities. Its place is found in the old primitive symbolic charts, in which, as shown in the text, it is represented by a boundless darkness on the ground of which appears the first central point in white, thus symbolizing coeval and co-eternal spirit matter, making its appearance in the phenomenal world before its first differentiation. When the one becomes two, it may then be referred to as spirit and matter. To spirit is referable every manifestation of consciousness, reflective or direct, and of unconscious purposiveness, to adopt a modern expression used in Western philosophy, so-called, as evidenced in the vital principle and nature's submission to the majestic sequence of immutable law. Matter must be regarded as objectivity in its purest abstraction, the self-existing basis whose septenary manventeric differentiations constitute the objective reality underlying the phenomena of each phase of conscious existence. During the period of universal pralaya, cosmic ideation is non-existent, and the variously differentiated states of cosmic substance are resolved back again into the primary state of abstract potential objectivity. Manventeric impulse commences with the reawakening of cosmic ideation, the universal mind, concurrently with and parallel to the primary emergence of cosmic substance, the latter being the manventeric vehicle of the former, from its undifferentiated pralaic state. Then absolute wisdom mirrors itself in its ideation, which by a transcendental process, superior to and incomprehensible by human consciousness, results in the cosmic energy, Fohat, thrilling through the bosom of inert substance, forward impels it to activity and guides its primary differentiations on all the 7 planes of cosmic consciousness. There are thus 7 protiles, as they are now called. With Aryan antiquity called them the 7 prakriti, or natures, serving severely as the relatively homogeneous basis, which in the course of the increasing heterogeneity in the evolution of the universe differentiate into the marvelous complexity presented by phenomena on the planes of perception. The term relatively is used designedly because the very existence of such a process, resulting in the primary segregations of undifferentiated cosmic substance into its septenary basis of evolution, compels us to regard the protile of each plane as only a mediate phase assumed by substance in its passage from abstract into full objectivity. Note, the term protile is due to Mr. Crookes, the eminent chemist, who has given that name to pre-matter, if one may so call primordial and purely homogeneous substances, suspected, if not actually yet found, by science in the ultimate composition of the atom. But the incipient segregation of primordial matter into atoms and molecules takes its rise subsequent to the evolution of the 7 protiles. It is the last of these, having recently detected the possibility of its existence on our plane, that Mr. Crookes is in search of. End of note. Cosmic ideation is said to be non-existent during prolific periods for the simple reason that there is no one and nothing to perceive its effects. There can be no manifestation of consciousness, semi-consciousness, or even unconscious purposiveness, except through the vehicle of matter. That is to say, on this our plane, wherein human consciousness in its normal state cannot soar beyond what is known as transcendental metaphysics, it is only through some molecular aggregation of fabric that spirit wells up in a stream of individual subconscious subjectivity. And as matter existing apart from perception is a mere abstraction, both of these aspects of the absolute, cosmic substance and cosmic ideation, are mutually interdependent. In strict accuracy, to avoid confusion and misconception, the term matter ought to be applied to the aggregate of objects of possible perception, and substance to noumena. For inasmuch as the phenomena of our plane are the creation of the perceiving ego, the modifications of its own subjectivity, all the states of matter representing the aggregate of perceived objects can have but a relative and purely phenomenal existence for the children of our plane. As the modern idealists would say, the cooperation of subject and object results in the sense object of phenomenon. But this does not necessarily lead to the conclusion that it is the same on all other planes, that the cooperation of the two on the planes of the septenary differentiation results in a septenary aggregate of phenomena which are likewise non-existent per se, though concrete realities for the entities of whose experience they form a part, in the same manner as the rocks and rivers around us are real from the standpoint of a physicist, though unreal illusions of sense from that of the metaphysician. It would be an error to say or even conceive such a thing. From the standpoint of the highest metaphysics, the whole universe, God's included, is an illusion. But the illusion of him who is in himself an illusion differs on every plane of consciousness, and we have no more right to dogmatize about the possible nature of the perceptive faculties of an ego on, say, the 6th plane, than we have to identify our perceptions with, or make them a standard for, those of an ant and its mode of consciousness. The pure object apart from consciousness is unknown to us while living on the plane of our 3-dimensional world, as we know only the mental states it excites in the perceiving ego. Note: cosmic ideation focused in a principle or upadhi basis results as the consciousness of the individual ego. Its manifestation varies with the degree of upadhi, For example, through that known as manas it wells up as mind consciousness, though the more finely differentiated fabric, sixth state of matter, or the buddhi resting on the experience of manas as its basis, as a stream of spiritual intuition. End of note. And so long as the contrast of subject and object endures, to wit, as long as we enjoy our five senses and no more, and do not know how to divorce our all-perceiving ego, the higher self, from the thraldom of these senses, so long will it be impossible for the personal ego to break through the barrier which separates it from a knowledge of things in themselves, or substance. That ego, progressing in an arc of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of every plane, but not till the unit is merged in the all, whether on this or any other plane, and subject and object alike vanish in the absolute negation of the nirvanic state, negation again only from our plane, is scaled that peak of omniscience, the knowledge of things in themselves, and the solution of the yet more awful riddle approached, before which even the highest Dayankohan bow in silence and ignorance, the unspeakable mystery of that which is called by the Vedantians the Parabrahman. Therefore, such being the case, all those who sought to give a name to the incognizable principle have simply degraded it. Even to speak of cosmic ideation, save in its phenomenal aspect, is like trying to bottle up primordial chaos, or to put a printed label on eternity. What then is the primordial substance, that mysterious object of which alchemy was ever talking, and which became the subject of philosophical speculations in every age? What can it be finally, even in its phenomenal pre-differentiation? Even that is all in manifested nature and nothing to our senses. It is mentioned under the various names in every cosmogony, referred to in every philosophy, and shown to be to this day the ever-grasp-eluding protives in nature. We touch and do not feel it. We look at it without seeing it. We breathe it and do not perceive it. We hear and smell it without the smallest cognition that it is there. For it is in every molecule of that which in our illusion and ignorance we regard as matter in any of its states, or conceive as a feeling, a thought, an emotion. In short, it is the upadhi, or vehicle of every possible phenomenon, whether physical, mental, or psychic. In the opening sentences of Genesis, as in the Chaldean cosmogony, in the Puranas of India, and in the Book of the Dead of Egypt, it opens everywhere the cycle of manifestation. It is termed chaos, and the face of the waters, incubated by the spirit proceeding from the unknown under whatever name. See chaos, theos, cosmos. The authors of the sacred scriptures in India go deeper into the origin of things evolved than Thales or Job, for they say, from intelligence called Mahat in the Puranas, associated with ignorance, Ishvar, as a personal deity, attended by its projective power, in which the quality of dualness, tamas, insensibility, predominates, proceeds ether, from ether, air, from air, heat, from heat, water, and from water, earth, with everything on it. From this same self, was the ether produced, says the Veda. Taittiriya Upanishad 2, verse 1. It becomes thus evident that it is not this ether, sprung at the fourth remove from an emanation of intelligence associated with ignorance, which is the highest principle, the deific entity worshipped by the Greeks and Latins under the name of Pater Omnipotens Aether and Magnus Aether in its collective aggregates. The septenary gradation and the innumerable subdivisions and differences made by the ancients between the powers of ether collectively from its outward fringe of effects with which our science is so familiar up to the imponderable substance once admitted as the ether of space, now about to be rejected, has been ever a vexing riddle for every branch of knowledge. The mythologists and symbologists of our day, confused by this incomprehensible glorification on the one hand and degradation on the other of the same deified entity and in the same religious systems, are often driven to the most ludicrous mistakes. The Church, firm as a rock in each and all of her early errors of interpretation, has made of ether the abode of her satanic legions. Note: for it is thus that the Church has interpreted verse 12 of the 6th chapter to the Ephesians. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. Further on, St. Paul mentions the spiritual malices, wickedness in English texts, spread in the air, spiritualia nicitiae celestibus, the Latin text giving various names to these malices, the innocent elementals. But the Church is right this time, though wrong in calling them all devils. The astral light or low ether is full of conscious and semi-conscious and unconscious entities. Only the Church has less power over them than over invisible microbes or mosquitoes. End of note. The whole hierarchy of the, quote, fallen, unquote, angels is there, the cosmocratores, or the world-bearers, according to Bossuet, mundi tenants, the world-holders, as Tertullian calls them, and mundi domini, world dominations, or rather dominators, the curbati, or curved, etc., who thus make of the stars and celestial orbs in their course devils. The difference made between the 7 states of ether, itself one of the 7 cosmic principles, while the aether of the ancients is universal fire, may be seen in the injunctions by Zoroaster and Zealous, respectively. The former said, "Consult it only when it is without form or figure, absque forma et figura," which means without flames or burning coals. When it has a form, heed it not, teaches Zealous. But when it is formless, obey it, for it is then sacred fire, and all it will reveal thee shall be true. Note: Ephatum 16, Oracles of Zoroaster. This proves that ether, itself an aspect of Akasha, has in its turn several aspects, or principles. All the ancient nations defined ether in its imponderable aspect and potency. Virgil calls Jupiter pater omnipotens aether, the great aether. Note, see Georgica, Book 2. The Hindus have also placed it among their deities under the name of Akasha, the synthesis of aether. And the author of the Homoeomorian system of philosophy, Anaxagoras of Clazomene, firmly believed that the spiritual prototypes of all things, as well as their elements, were to be found in the boundless ether where they were generated, whence they evolved, and whither they returned, an occult teaching. It thus becomes clear that it is from ether, in its highest synthetic aspect once anthropomorphized, that sprung the first idea of personal creative deity. With the philosophical Hindus, the elements are tamas, that is, unenlightened by intellect, which they obscure. We have now to exhaust the question of the mystical meaning of primordial chaos and of the root principle, and show how they were connected in the ancient philosophies with Akasha, wrongly translated aether, and also with Maya, illusion, of which Ishvara is the male aspect. We shall speak further on of the intelligent principle, or rather of the invisible immaterial properties in the visible and material elements that sprung from the primordial chaos. For what is the primordial chaos but aether? It is asked in Isis Unveiled. Not the modern ether, not such as is recognized now, but such as was known to the ancient philosophers long before the time of Moses, but aether with all its mysterious and occult properties, containing in itself the germs of universal creation. Upper aether, or Akasha, is the celestial virgin and mother of every existing form and being, from whose bosom, as soon as incubated by the divine spirit, are called into existence matter and life, force and action. Aether is the Aditi of the Hindus, and it is Akasha. Electricity, magnetism, heat, light, and chemical action are so little understood even now that fresh facts are constantly widening the range of our knowledge. Who knows where ends the power of this protean giant, aether, or whence its mysterious origin? who we mean that denies the spirit that works in it and evolves out of it all visible forms. It will be an easy task to show that the cosmological legends all over the world are based on a knowledge by the ancients of those sciences, which have allied themselves in our days in support of the doctrine of evolution, and that further research may demonstrate that those ancients were far better acquainted with the fact of evolution itself, embracing both its physical and spiritual aspects, than we are now. With the old philosophers, evolution was a universal theorem, a doctrine embracing the whole, and an established principle, while our modern evolutionists are enabled to present us merely with speculative theoretics, with particular, if not wholly negative, theorems. It is idle for the representatives of our modern wisdom to close the debate and pretend that the question is settled merely because the obscure phraseology of the Mosaic far later account clashes with a definite exegesis of exact science. Ice is unveiled. If one turns to the laws or ordinances of Manu, one finds the prototype of all these ideas, mostly lost to the Western world in their original form, disfigured by the later interpolations and additions. They have nevertheless preserved quite enough of their ancient spirit to show its character. Removing the darkness, the self-existent Lord, Vishnu, Narayana, etc., becoming manifest, and wishing to produce beings from his essence, created in the beginning water alone. In that he cast seed, that became a golden egg. Verse 6, 7, 8, and 9. Whence this self-existent Lord? It is called this, and is spoken of as darkness, imperceptible without definite qualities, undiscoverable as if wholly in sleep. Verse 5. Having dwelt in that egg for a whole divine year, he who is called in the world Brahma splits that egg in two, and from the upper portion he forms the heaven, from the lower the earth, and from the middle the sky, and the perpetual place of waters. Verses 12 and 13. But there is, directly following these verses, something more important for us, as it corroborates entirely our esoteric teachings. From verse 14 to 36, evolution is given in the order described in the esoteric philosophy. This cannot be easily gainsaid. Even Medhatiti, the son of Virashvamin, and the author of the commentary, the Manubhashya, whose date according to the Western Orientalists is 1000 Anno Domini, helps us with his remarks to the elucidation of the truth. He showed himself either unwilling to give out more because he knew that the truth which has to be kept from the profane, or else he was really puzzled. Still, what he does give out makes the septenary principle in men and nature plain enough. Let us begin with chapter 1 of the ordinances or laws. After the self-existent Lord, the unmanifesting Logos of the unknown, darkness becomes manifested in the golden egg. It is from this egg, from 2. That which is the undiscrete, undifferentiated, cause, eternal, which is and is not. From it issue that male who is called in the world Brahma. Here we find, as in all genuine philosophical systems, even the egg or the circle or zero, boundless infinity, referred to as it. Note. The ideal apex of the Pythagorean triangle, vide the sections in Volume 2, Cross and Circle, and the earliest symbolics of the cross, end of note. And Brahma, the first unit only, referred to as the male god, that is, the fructifying principle. It is the circle symbol with a vertical line in it, or 10, the decade. On the plane of the septenary, or our world only, it is called Brahma. On that of a unified decade in the realm of reality, this male Brahma is an illusion. 14. From the self, Atmana, he creates mind, one which is and is not. 2. And from mind, egoism, self-consciousness, the ruler. 3. The Lord. 1. The mind is Manas. Medhatiti, the commentator, justly observes here that it is the reverse of this, and shows already interpolation and rearranging. For it is Manas that springs from Ahamkara, or universal self-consciousness, as Manas in the microcosm springs from Mahat, or Mahabuddhi, Buddhi in man. For Manas is dual, and as shown and translated by Colebrooke, is serving both for sense and action. It's an organ by affinity, being cognate with the rest. The rest means here that Manas, our fifth principle, the fifth because the body was named the first, which is the reverse of the true philosophical order, is in affinity both with Atma Buddhi and with the lower four principles. Note, Vida A. Cook Bernal's translation, edited by Ed W. Hopkins, Ph.D. End of note. Hence our teaching, namely, that Manas follows Atma Buddhi to Devakan, and that the lower, dregs, the residue of Manas, remains with Kamarupa in Limbus, or Kamaloka, the abode of the quote shells, unquote. 2. Such is the meaning of Manas, which is and is not. 3. Medhatiti translates it as the one conscience of the I, or ego, not ruler, as the Orientalists do. Thus they translate verse 16, quote, He also, having made the subtle parts of those six, the great self and the five organs of sense, of unmeasured brightness, to enter into the elements of self, Atma Matarasu, created all beings, unquote. When, according to Medhatiti, it ought to read Matarachit instead of Atra Matarasu, and thus be made to say, quote, He having pervaded the subtile parts of those six, of unmeasured brightness by elements of self, created all beings, unquote. This latter reading must be the correct one, since he, the self, is what we call Atma, and thus constitutes the seventh principle, the synthesis of the six. Such is also the opinion of the editor of Manavadharma Shastra, who seems to have intuitionally entered far deeper into the spirit of the philosophy than the translator of the Ordinances of Manu, the late Dr. Bonnell, for he hesitates little between the text of Kulukka and the commentaries of Medhatiti, rejecting the Tamantra, or subtle elements, and the Atma Matarasu of Kulukka, he says, applying to the principles of the cosmic self. The six appear rather to be the Manas plus the five principles of ether, air, fire, water, earth, having united five portions of these six with the spiritual element, the seventh. He thus created all existing things. Atma Mantra is therefore the spiritual atom as opposed to the elementary, not reflective elements of himself. Thus he corrects the translation of verse 17, as the subtle elements of bodily forms of this one depend on these six, so the wise call his form Sharira. And he says that elements mean here portions or parts or principles, which reading is borne out by verse 19, which says, 19. This non-eternal universe arises from the eternal by means of the subtle elements or forms of those seven very glorious principles, Purusha. Commenting upon which, according to Medhatiti, the editor remarks that the five elements plus mind, manas, and self-consciousness, ahamkara, are meant. Subtle elements as before, meaning five portions of form, or principles. Note, ahamkara, as universal self-consciousness, has a triple aspect, as also manas. For this conception of I, or one's ego, is either sattva, pure quietude, or appears as rajas, active, or remains tamas, stagnant, in darkness. It belongs to heaven and earth, and assumes the properties of either. End of note. For verse 20 shows it, when saying of these five elements or five portions of form, rupa, plus manas and self-consciousness, that they constitute the seven purusha, or principles, called in the Puranas the seven prakritis. Moreover, these five elements or five portions are spoken of in verse 27 as those which are called the atomic destructible portions. Therefore, this creative Brahma issuing from the mundane or golden egg unites in himself both the male and the female principles. He is, in short, the same as all the creative protologoi. Of Brahma, however, it could not be said, as of Dionysus, protogonon difne trigonon, bakeion anakta, agrion areton, kufion dikerota dimorphon. lunar Jehovah, Bacchus truly, with David dancing nude before his symbol in the ark, because no licentious Dionysia were ever established in his name and honor. All such public worship was exoteric, and the great universal symbols were distorted universally, as those of Krishna are now by the Vallabhacharya's of Bombay, the followers of the infant god. But are these popular gods the true deity? Are they the apex and synthesis of the sevenfold creation, man included? Never. Each and all are one of the rungs of that septenary ladder of divine consciousness, pagan as Christian. For Ein Sof also is said to manifest through the 7 letters of Jehovah's name, who, having usurped the place of the unknown limitless, was given by his devotees his 7 angels of the presence, his 7 principles. Yet they are mentioned in almost every school. In the pure Sankhya philosophy, Mahat, Ahamkara, and the 5 Tanmatras are called the 7 Prakritis, or natures, and they are counted from Mahabuddhi or Mahat down to earth. See Sankhya Karika 3 and commentaries. Nevertheless, however disfigured for rabbinical purposes is the original Elohistic version by Ezra, however repulsive at times even the esoteric meaning in the Hebrew scrolls, which is far more so than its outward veil or cloaking may be. Once the Jehovistic portions are eliminated, the Mosaic books are found full of purely occult and priceless knowledge, especially in the first 6 chapters. Read by the aid of the Kabbalah, one finds a matchless temple of occult truths, a well of deeply concealed beauty hidden under a structure, the visible architecture which, its apparent symmetry notwithstanding, is unable to stand the criticism of cold reason, or to reveal its age, for it belongs to all the ages. There is more wisdom concealed under the exoteric fables of Puranas and Bible than in all the exoteric facts and science in the literature of the world, and more occult true science than there is of exact knowledge in all the academies. Or in plain and stronger language, there is as much esoteric wisdom in some portions of the exoteric Puranas and Pentateuch as there is of nonsense and of designed childish fancy in it, when read only in the dead-letter murderers' interpretations of great dogmatic religions, and especially of sects. Let anyone read the first verses of chapter 1 of Genesis and reflect upon them. There God commands to another God, who does his bidding, even in the cautious English Protestant translation of James, the first authorized edition. In the beginning, the Hebrew language, having no word to express the idea of eternity, God fashions the heaven and the earth, and the latter is without form and void, while the former is no heaven in fact, but the deep chaos with darkness upon its face. Note on the word eternity. The word eternity, by which Christian theologians interpret the term forever and ever, does not exist in the Hebrew tongue, either as a word or meaning. Olam, says Leclerc, only imports a time when beginning or end is not known. It does not mean infinite duration, and the word forever in the Old Testament only signifies a long time. Nor is the term eternity used in the Christian sense in the Puranas, for in Vishnu Purana it is clearly stated that the eternity and immortality only, existence to the end of the Kalpa, is meant. Book 2, Chapter 8. End of note. Note on the deep chaos with darkness upon its face. Orphic theogony is purely Oriental and Indian in spirit. The successive transformations it has undergone have now separated it widely from the spirit of ancient cosmogony, as may be seen by comparing it even with Hesiod's theogony. Yet the truly Aryan Hindu spirit breaks forth everywhere in both Hesiod's and the Orphic theogony. See the remarkable work of James Darmstaedter, Cosmogonie Aryenne, in his Essais Orientaux. Thus the original Greek conception of chaos is that of the secret wisdom religion. In his sight, therefore, chaos is infinite, boundless, endless, and beginningless in duration and abstraction at the same time as a visible presence. Space filled with darkness, which is primordial matter in its pre-cosmic state. For in its etymological sense, chaos is space, according to Aristotle, and space is the ever unseen and unknowable deity in our philosophy. End of notes. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, verse 2, or the great deep of the infinite space. And this Spirit is Narayana, or Vishnu. And God said, Let there be firmament, verse 6. And God the second obeyed and made the firmament, verse 7. And God said, Let there be light, and there was light. Now the latter does not mean light at all, but in the Kabbalah, the androgyne Adam Kadmon, or Sephira, spiritual light, for they are one, or according to the Chaldean Book of Numbers, the secondary angels, the first being the Elohim, who are the aggregate of that fashioning God. For to whom are those words of command addressed? And who is it who commands? That which commands is the eternal law, and he who obeys, the Elohim, the known quantity acting in and with X, or the coefficient of the unknown quantity, the forces of the one force. All this is occultism, and is found in the archaic stanzas. It is perfectly immaterial whether we call these forces the diankochons or the Ophanim, as St. John does. The one universal light, which to man is darkness, is ever existent, says the Chaldean Book of Numbers. From it proceeds periodically the energy which is reflected in the deep or chaos, the storehouse of future worlds, and once awakened stirs up and fructifies the latent forces, which are the ever-present eternal potentialities in it. Then awake anew the Brahmas and Buddhas, the co-eternal forces, and a new universe springs into being. In the Sefer Yezairah, the Kabbalistic book of creation, the author has evidently repeated the words of Manu. In it, the divine substance is represented as having alone existed from the eternity, boundless and absolute, and as having emitted from itself the Spirit. Note, the manifested Spirit. Absolute divine Spirit is one with absolute divine substance. Parabrahm and Mula Prakriti are one in essence. Therefore, cosmic ideation and cosmic substance in their primal character are one also. End of note. One is the Spirit of the living God, blessed be its name, which liveth for ever. Voice, Spirit, and Word, this is the Holy Spirit. And this is the Kabbalistic abstract Trinity, so unceremoniously anthropomorphized by the Christian Fathers. Note, see Sefer Yezairah, chapter 1, Mishnah 9. End of note. From this triple one emanated the whole cosmos. From the one emanated number 2, or air, the Father, the creative element. And then number 3, water, the mother, proceeded from the air. Ether or fire completes the mystic four, the Arba'il. Note, see the same source. It is from Arba that Abram is made to come. End of note. When the concealed of the concealed wanted to reveal himself, he first made a point, primordial point, or the first Sephiroth, air or Holy Ghost, shaped into his sacred form, the 10th Sephiroth, or the heavenly man, and conveyed it with a rich and splendid garment, that is, the world. Note, Soha, 1, 2a. End of note. He maketh the wind his messengers, flaming fire his servants, says the Yezairah, showing the cosmical character of the later humorized elements, and that the Spirit permeates every atom in cosmos. Note, Sefer Yezairah, Mishnah 9, 10. Everywhere throughout the Acts, Paul calls the invisible cosmic beings the elements. See Greek texts. But now the elements are degraded into and limited to atoms, of which nothing is known so far, and which are only children of necessity, as ether is too, as we said in Isis. The poor primordial elements have long been exiled, and our ambitious physicists run races to determine who shall add one more to the fledgling brood of the 60 and odd elementary substances. Meanwhile, there rage a war in modern chemistry about terms. We are denied the right to call these substances chemical elements, for they are not primordial principles of self-existing essences out of which the universe was fashioned, according to Plato. Such ideas associated with the word element were good enough for the old Greek philosophy, but modern science rejects them, for, as Professor Crookes says, they are unfortunate terms, and experimental science will have nothing to do with any kind of essences except those which it can see, smell, or taste. It leaves others to the metaphysicians. We must feel grateful even for so much. End of note. This primordial substance is called by some chaos. Plato and the Pythagoreans named it the soul of the world, after it had been impregnated by the spirit of that which broods of the primeval waters, or chaos. It is by being reflected in it, says the Kabbalists, that the brooding principle created the phantasmagoria of the visible, manifested universe. Chaos before, ether after the reflection. It is still the deity that pervades all space and things. It is the invisible, imponderable spirit of things and the invisible, but too tangible fluid that radiates from the fingers of the healthy magnetizer. For it is the vital electricity, life itself, called in derision by the Marquis de Mirville, the nebulous almighty. It is termed by the theurgists and occultists to this day the living fire, and there is not a Hindu who practices at dawn a certain kind of meditation but knows its effects. Note. Writing upon this subject in Isis Unveiled, we said of it that it was the chaos of the ancients, the Zoroastrian sacred fire, or the Atash Beram of the Parsis, the Hermes fire, the Elmas fire of the ancient Germans, the lighting of Cybele, the burning torch of Apollo, the flame on the altar of Pan, the inextinguishable fire in the temple of the Acropolis, and in that of Vesta, the fire flame of Pluto's helm, the brilliant sparks on the hats of the Dioscuri on the Gorgon head, the helm of Pallas, and the staff of Mercury, the Egyptian Phthah Ra, the Grecian Zeus Cutibates, the descending of Pausanias, the Pentecostal fire tongues, the burning bush of Moses, the pillar of fire from the Exodus, and the burning lamp of Abram, the eternal fire of the bottomless pit, the Delphic oracle of Athens, the sidereal light of the Rosicrucians, the Akasha of the Hindu adepts, the astral light of Eliphas Levi, the nerve opera and the fluid of the magnetists, the odd of the Reichenbach, the psychot and actinic force of Thury, the psychic force of Sergeant Cox, and the atmospheric magnetism of some naturalists, galvanism, and final electricity. All these are but various names for many different manifestations or effects of the same mysterious, all-pervading cause, the Greek archaeus. We now add, it is this and much more. End of note. It is the spirit of light, and Magnus, as truly expressed by an opponent. Magus and Magnus are two branches growing from the same trunk and shooting forth the same resultants. And in this appellation of living fire we may also discover the meaning of the puzzling sentences in the Zendavesta saying that there is a fire that gives knowledge of the future, science and amiable speech, that is, develops an extraordinary eloquence in the Sibyl, the sensitive, and even some orators. This fire is spoken of in all the Hindu books, as also in the Kabbalistic works. The Zohar explains it as the white hidden fire in the Resha-Tvaira, the white head, whose will causes the fiery fluid to flow in 370 currents in every direction of the universe. It is identical with the serpent that runs with 370 leaps, of the cipher Zenyuta, which, when the perfect man, the Metatron is raised, that is, when the divine man indwells in the animal man, it, the serpent, becomes three spirits, that is to say, is Atma Buddhimanas in our theosophical phraseology. Read Part 2 in Volume 2, Section 3, The Many Meanings of the War in Heaven. Spirit, then, or cosmic ideation, and cosmic substance, one of whose principles is ether, are one, and include the elements, in the sense St. Paul attaches to them. These elements are the veiled synthesis standing for Deankochans, Devas, Sephiroth, Amshaspens, Archangels, etc., etc. The ether of science, the Ilus of Berosus, or the protyle of chemistry, constitutes, so to speak, the rude material, relatively, out of which the above-named builders, following the plan traced out for them eternal in the divine thought, fashion the systems in the cosmos. They are myths, we are told. No more so than ether and the atoms, we answer. The two latter are absolute necessities of physical science. The builders are as absolute a necessity of metaphysics. We are twitted with, "You never saw them." We ask the materialists, "Have you ever seen ether, or your atoms, or again, your force?" Moreover, one of the greatest Western evolutionists of our modern day, the coadjutor of Darwin, Mr. A.R. Wallace, when discussing the inadequacy of natural selection alone to account for the physical form of man, admits the guiding action of high intelligences as a necessary part of the great laws which govern the material universe, from contributions to theory of natural selection. These high intelligences are the Deankochans of the occultists. Indeed, there are few myths in any religious system worthy of the name, but have an historical as well as a scientific foundation. Myths, justly observes Pocock, are now proved to be fables just in proportion as we misunderstand them, truths in proportion as they were once understood. The one prevailing, most distinct idea found in all ancient teaching with reference to cosmic evolution and the first creation of our globe with all its products, organic and inorganic, strange word for an occultist to use, is that the whole cosmos has sprung from the divine thought. This thought impregnates matter, which is co-eternal with the one reality, and all that lives and breathes evolves from the emanations of the one immutable, Parabrahm, equals Mula Prakriti, the eternal one root. The form of these is, so to say, the aspect of the central point turned inward into regions quite inaccessible to human intellect, and is absolute abstraction, whereas in its aspect as Mula Prakriti, the eternal root of all, it gives one some hazy comprehension at least of the mystery of being. Therefore it was taught in the inner temples that this visible universe of spirit and matter is but the concrete image of the ideal abstraction. It was built on the model of the first divine idea. Thus our universe existed from eternity in a latent state. The soul animating this purely spiritual universe is the central sun, the highest deity itself. It was not the one who built the concrete form of the idea, but the first begotten. And as it was constructed on the geometrical figure of the dodecahedron, the first begotten was pleased to employ 12,000 years in its creation. Note, Plato, Timaeus, end of note. The Latin number is expressed in the Tyrrhenian cosmogony, which shows man created in the 6th millennium. This agrees with the Egyptian theory of 6,000, quote, years, unquote, and with the Hebrew computation. Notes, see Suidas versus Tyrrhenia. And the reader will understand that by years is meant ages, not mere periods of 13 lunar months each. End of notes. But it is the exoteric form of it. The secret computation explains that the 12,000 and the 6,000 years are years of Brahma, one day of Brahma being equal to 4,320,000,000 years. Sanchoniathon, in his Cosmogony, declares that when the wind, spirit, became enamored with its own principles, the chaos, an intimate union took place, which connection was called portos, and from this sprang the seed of all. Note. See the Greek translation by Philobibulus. End of note. And the chaos knew not its own production, for it was senseless, but from its embrace with the wind was generated mot, or the ilus, mud. Note. See Cori, ancient fragment. End of note. From this proceeded the spores of creation and the generation of the universe. Zeus sent Aether, and Ctonia, the chaotic earth, and Metis, the water, his wives, Osiris and Isis Latona, the former god also representing ether, the first emanation of the supreme deity, Amun, the primeval source of light. The goddess earth and water again, Mithras, the rock-born god, the symbol of the male mundane fire, or the personified primordial light, and Mithra, the fire goddess, at once his mother and his wife, the pure element of fire, the active or male principle, regarded as light and heat in conjunction with earth and water or matter, female or passive elements of cosmic generation. Mithras is the son of Borj, the Persian mundane mountain, from which he flashed out as a radiant ray of light. Notes. Mithras was regarded among the Persians as the Theos Epektros, god of the rock. Note on Borj. Borj is called a fire mountain, a volcano, therefore it contains fire, rock, earth, and water, the male or active and the female, or passive elements. The myth is suggestive. End of notes. Brahma, the fire god, and his prolific consort, and the Hindu Agni, the refulgent deity from whose body issue 1,000 streams of glory and 7 tongues of flame, and in whose honor certain Brahmans preserve to this day a perpetual fire. Siva, personified by the mundane mountain of the Hindus, the Meru. These terrific fire gods, who are said in the legend to have descended from heaven, like the Jewish Jehovah, in a pillar of fire, and a dozen other archaic double-sexed deities, all loudly proclaim their hidden meaning. And what could these dual myths mean but the psychochemical principle of primordial creation, the first evolution in its triple manifestation of spirit, force, and matter, the divine correlation at its starting point, allegorized as the marriage of fire and water, products of electrifying spirit union of the male active principle with the female passive element, which become the parents of their tellurian child, cosmic matter, the prima materia, whose soul is aether, and whose shadow is astral light, from Isis Unveiled. The fragments of the systems that have now reached us are rejected as absurd fables. Nevertheless, occult science, having survived even the great flood that submerged the antediluvian giants and with them their very memory, save in the Secret Doctrine, the Bible and other scriptures, still holds the key to all world problems. Let us apply that key to the rare fragments of long-forgotten cosmogonies and try by their scattered parts to re-establish the once universal cosmogony of the Secret Doctrine. The key fits them all. No one can study ancient philosophies seriously without perceiving that the striking similitude of conception between all, in their exoteric form very often, in their hidden spirit invariably, as a result of no mere coincidence, but of a concurrent design, and that there was during the youth of mankind one language, one knowledge, one universal religion, when there were no churches, no creeds or sects, but when every man was a priest unto himself. And if it is shown that already in those ages, which are shut out from our sight by the exuberant growth of tradition, human religious thought developed in the uniform sympathy in every portion of the globe, then it becomes evident that, born under whatever latitude in the cold north or the burning south, in the east or west, that thought was inspired by the same revelations, and man was nurtured under the protecting shadow of the same tree of knowledge. Next section will be Chaos, Theos, Cosmos.